sisters, I would like to start my Jum'ah khutbah in an unusual way by acknowledging that this land we are living in right now has been for thousands of years the land of indigenous people, the Huron and Wendat, the Seneca, the Sasaga of the Credit, and the people of the Turtle Island. By acknowledging so that this is a land of a people who used to live before us thousands of years ago, I have chosen, like many others, this Canada Day not to celebrate and to consider this day as a day of reflection, a day in which we need to examine the past, know what we're doing to fix at the present, and what we hope to see in the future. And in today's khutbah, and this is the whole purpose of doing khutbah, is to raise the awareness and to stand for justice. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط, as Allah Azza wa Jalla have commanded us to do so in the Quran. And we need to acknowledge the problems that are existing within the indigenous community. And when we do so, we need to talk about colonialism. And when we explore colonialism, we will be able to understand so many things. Why the situation of the indigenous people right now is so critical, why there is an inequity, an injustice that is exercised against the indigenous people nowadays, whether in the health system or in the educational system, or generally speaking, as the perception of the indigenous people in the Canadian society has always been negative, and will also help us to understand what is happening right now in Hayy al-Sheikh Jarrah in Palestine, in Al-Quds. And if you are following with the NCCM, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, 2 days ago they sent out a call to every Canadian to send a message to the Prime Minister of Canada and say to him, take a stand, speak out about the injustice that is happening right now in the Hayy al-Sheikh Jarrah, the suburb of Al-Quds, which is close by an adjacent Hayy to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Speak against the cleansing and the unjust and brutal treatment that the people of Palestine are getting as a result of standing up for their rights. When we go back in history, we will see that the colonialism ideology, which is primarily based on hierarchical culture and supremacy, have come to this land with the perception in their mind. The first settlers, meaning to say, with the perception in their mind, they are so superior to the native inhabitants of this land. They have the right to kill and cleanse the land from the first inhabitants. Thousands were killed, and I was astonished and surprised and saddened at the same time what the first settlers have done to the first inhabitants of this country. Not only that, after they did mass killing and murdering and cleansing to the land, the native or the indigenous people were pushed to live in segregated areas that are called reserves, that does not have the adequate resources to help them be able to connect with the land and live their normal life. The perception the first settlers noted is that North America is a land that has no people. And despite of the fact that the native of this land, the first inhabitants of this land were living in a civilized life, they had established civilization, the native perception about the indigenous people is always promoted. And if you're like me, have watched the cowboys movies, we've seen on these movies how the indigenous people were portrayed, unfortunately, as being savage, as murderers, or attacking the colonialists who came to help them establish their life in their own lands. Distortion to the fact. Distortion to the fact. Mass media have played a big role to hide so many facts and to promote, unfortunately, so many lies that we are unaware of, and as time goes by, are being popped up to the surface. To make things even worse, the colonialists have created what's so-called residential schools, whereby the indigenous children were forced to leave their homes and study in a very inadequate environment in which the basics of living were not met. The malnourishment, the harsh treatment, the purpose of these schools was nothing but to assimilate the children of the indigenous people to come offer that servants for the white settler or the colonist who is controlling the resources of their land. Not only that, these schools were used as laboratories for different medications. Many were killed as a result of that. The 761 mass grave that was discovered, along with the first one that come before it, the 200 something, is a clear indication that there has been injustice done to the indigenous people by those who have the ideology, they carry the ideology of colonialism in their mind, seeing themselves as being superior and belittling others around them and spreading rumors and racial comments and discriminate against people. Look into how Islam had prohibited these practices when he said, what Allah Azza said to us in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ تَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. The most conscious among you are the most pious to Allah Azza wa Jal. You're all equal, you're all children of Adam. And that's why the Quran teaches us, لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ولا نساء من نساء عسى أن يكون خيرا منهن. Do not belittle others around you. Do not spread the rumors. Do not discriminate. Do not racialize others around you. They could be better than you. Now, let's contrast the impact of cannibalism on the indigenous people living in North America and see what is happening to one of the most precious lands for the Muslim Ummah in the land of Palestine. The colonists or the occupiers who have come and occupied the land of Palestine in 1948 promoted through the mass media that we have people with no land are coming to establish livelihood in a land that has no people. A big lie. A big lie. The land of Palestine has been a Muslim land for hundreds of years. And Muslims who are living in Palestine were living in a civilized manner and had a civilization. And it is the perception of this colonist or the occupier who have come to the land of Palestine, destroying 417 almost villages and expelling over 700,000 Palestinians to different parts of Palestine and the surrounding areas. After that, to establish what is so-called the State of Israel. Shame on the international community who have accepted this practice of colonialism, who have accepted this practice of prejudice and injustice, and they have accepted the practice of cleansing of the Palestinians from their own lands. We're seeing now the tragedy continues in the Hayy Sheikh Jarrah, which is, to those who do not understand, the term in Arabic is a suburb area adjacent to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, the municipality of Jerusalem, in which by some of the Palestinians who were expelled after the 1948 war were settled in that region, and legitimately through the Jordanian government who was supervising that region were given homes to live in. And unfortunately, after the 1967 war, the Israelis have used their own brutal force to expel the Palestinians from their own lands, including some of the people who are living in Haysh al-Jarrah. And one would be wondering, what is so critical about this region, or what is so critical about this area, when we know that there are many areas were taken from Palestinians from in the land of Palestine? What is so critical about that? That if the Israeli government were to take that part of the city, then the whole city will be collapsing in the hands of the occupiers. That Al-Masjid al-Aqsa will be threatened. That the identity of Jerusalem as a Muslim city will be lost. The same perception, the same ideology, the same strategy, the same work of the colonists historically has been exercised in the land of Palestine, promoting lies. And unfortunately, mass media also have played a critical role into making this not easy to the Palestinians and make it much easier to the occupiers or to the Israelis to be able to implement their agenda. Mass media has always portrayed Muslims in general and Palestinians who are standing for their own rights as terrorists, savage, similar to the image we have seen portrayed in mass media about the indigenous or the first inhabitants of this land. What is making the difference now, walillahi alhamd, is the new generation. And wallahi, I have belittled myself compared to those young people of male and female standing day and night in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and the surroundings of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in Haysh al-Jarrah. I salute Muna Kurd. I salute Muhammad Kurd. These names might not be familiar with you, but go online and Google them. Google them to see what these young people, 20 years old, or in their early 20s, have said in front of the TV cameras, were interviewed by CNN, were interviewed by the majority of the journalists or media in the world, and have said the things that none of the Muslim Ummah leaders have said. I saluted them and I say to them, may Allah bless you. May Allah give you the strength, because what you are doing is saving and protecting the dignity and honor of the Muslim Ummah. If it was not to these young people and to their phones and to the social media, then unfortunately Al-Masjid al-Aqsa will be swallowed by the Israeli occupation. Jerusalem's identity will be taken away and will be gone forever. It is these young people who have made the change, and it is our responsibility to do something to support them. All they're saying to us is, we don't need you to come and be with us on the land. We will be standing here. All we want you to do is promote the haqq, promote the truth, promote the what is really happening on the ground using social media. I used to be proud of CBC, one of the local formal channel of media in Canada, and lately I have changed my perception for the ugly stand, and I do say it clearly and bluntly, that media is doing and taking and standing when it comes to Muslims. When it comes to Muslims and the standing of the Muslim children in Palestine, they're always promoted as terrorists. They're always promoted as savage. And when it comes to the brutal aggression of the Israeli force, which is the largest nuclear force on earth, they're seen as people who are miskin. They're trying to protect themselves. Shame on the international community for taking a double standard. Shame on them by promoting Israel as an equal power to the Palestinians who have been in Gaza living under siege for 17 years. And the reason why they've been living under siege for 17 years is because they haven't chosen to elect a government that they want to govern them. But this government is not accepted with the superpower on who is backing up the Israeli government and always using the veto to abort any resolution from the United Nations to condemn the actions of the Israeli in Palestine. This is pure cannibalism. This is pure discrimination. This is pure racism. And it is about time that the mass, everyone like you, especially the young people, take the action and stand up to defend the rights of the indigenous people and say to them, we're behind you, we're with you, we understand what you have been subjugated to, and we acknowledge it, and we're here for you to help you be able to go back to normal life. We need to remove the perception that is the label that has been placed in the forehead of the indigenous people as being lazy people, drunk people, as people who are addicts. They don't deserve a life. We know this is something that's popping up once in a while in the media, and we know the inequity that the indigenous people receive in the healthcare system. This has to change. This has to change because we're living all together in this beautiful planet that is called the Earth, and it's our responsibility to spread the justice and to stand for each other. And it's also the same thing to be said about what is happening in the land of Palestine. We need to stand up for justice. We need to speak the truth. We need to promote the truth and fear none but Allah Azza wa Jal. This is only one life. We live it. Let's live it with integrity. Let's live it with the haqq, so that when we meet Allah Azza, we'll say, Ya Rabbi, we have done what it takes to stand for those who are have been subjugated to injustice in their life. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فيا فوز المستغفرين. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور انفسنا وسيئات اعمالنا من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. A call from me, please be more active. NCCM is, alhamdulillah, an organization that have taken upon itself the responsibility to stand up for the rights of those whose rights are being undermined. Whether it is the Muslims in Canada, or whether it is as they have stood up for the indigenous people, or whether it is to the Muslims outside Canada, because we need to stand by an organized entity to be able to fight for our rights. Islamophobia is also another form that is stemming from the colonialism, the mentality and the ideology of the colonialism that have destroyed the perceptions. We are suffering as a community from Islamophobia, whether it is the Quebec massacre, or whether it is the London massacre, or whether it is the incidents that we continue to hear once in a while, unfortunately almost on a weekly basis, about a Muslim or Muslim, primarily females being subjugated to racial comments and attacks. Islamophobia is real, and Islamophobia is a form of colonialism, or the impact and as a result of colonialism. We need to stand up. We have to promote justice. We need to use social media, and I urge the young people to use this powerful tool. You spend a big amount of time on your gadgets doing useless things, playing games or chatting for useless things. Use your talent, use your time to promote the haqq, to stand for yourself and for others who are undermined.